Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the German Council on Foreign Relations for our third DGAP morning briefing on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. Russian President Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine enters its third week. We are writing day 15. While there have been comparatively few advances on the ground in recent days, war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Russian forces have been reaching new extremes. Yesterday, I saw the bombing of a children's hospital, including a maternity ward in Mariupol. Earlier, Russian forces mined a corridor which they designed as a route for civilians to flee the city, according to the International Red Cross. Over 1,500 civilians have already died in Mariupol. The situation there is described as a humanitarian catastrophe. Meanwhile, the use of thermobaric weapons by Russia in northeastern Ukraine has been confirmed. There is also the fear that Moscow may start using chemical weapons. Kherson, the only Ukraine city under Russian control, where Ukrainians strongly protested the Russian presence, 400 demonstrators have been arrested yesterday, and Russian forces have also attacked nuclear plants. So while the war gets bloodier, its international repercussions become ever more complex. We are speaking as EU leaders convened for an informal summit at Versailles. Today and tomorrow, one of the topics is EU membership for Ukraine. In recent days, we have seen the US enacting an oil embargo on Russia, while the EU has not yet matched it as per German wishes, even though German Chancellor Olaf Scholz pledged in Washington a few weeks ago that the Allies are united and would act together. There's an initiative by the Israeli government to broker an armistice, and the Russian and the Ukraine foreign ministers are due to meet in Turkey later today. To address this rising complexity, we have this morning 4 rather than 3 speakers, DGAP experts who will assess the situation. I'm joined by Dr. András Rácz, Senior Fellow in the Security and Defense Program at the German Council on Foreign Relations, who's a leading expert on the Russian military and who will give us a status report. Good morning, András. We have also with us Dr. Stefan Meister, head of the International Order and Democracy Program here at the German Council on Foreign Relations and one of Germany's leading experts on Russia and the post-Soviet space, who will share his insights into the situation in Russia. We are also joined by Alia Fakhry, external consultant of the Migration Program at the German Council on Foreign Relations, who will assess the refugee situation. The official number of Ukraine refugees has already passed the 2 million mark and is increasing rapidly. She will also talk to the EU's response so far. And last but not least, we will be hearing from Didi Kirsten Tatlow, Senior Fellow at the Asia Program at the German Council on Foreign Relations, who will focus on China's role in this conflict. Our speakers will all talk for about 5 to 6 minutes. And after a short discussion, we will open up our discussion for your questions and comments. Please raise your hand or submit a question via the chat function, and I'll do my best to either call you up or put your question to the panel. The event will be recorded, and we will have to close sharply at 9:30 a.m. And with that, let's turn to András for his assessment. András, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear colleagues, and thank you for joining us in this Thursday morning briefing already for the third time. I really much hope that there would be no fourth briefing, but I'm afraid that there will be. Few things about the military situation. I'm trying to share my screen just to share a map with you. Hopefully it's going to function. Otherwise, we freeze the whole thing off. So this is the military. Do you see the map? Good, perfect. So this is the military situation as of yesterday. As you see, compared to last week, Russian forces made a substantial advance east of Kiev. Right now, Russian mechanized and tank forces are already standing in the outskirts of Kiev. Ukrainian forces are successful in upholding them. We will see how long that can last. In the south, the Russian control over the territory south of Zaporizhzhia is consolidating, and Russian separatist forces are also making advancements from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So the Ukrainian units that have been still fighting on the front line seem to have not much other choice than gradually retreat, preferably towards Dnipro, in order to avoid an encirclement. This also means there is no way in the military sense to save Mariupol. It's impossible to break through the siege line. The city will continue to be besieged. Few more things about the military situation. In the last few days, we've seen a Russian operational pause. They slowed down their advance, and also there was a considerable drop in the intensity of fighting on the 8th of March, namely on International Women's Day. But there is no reason to believe that this kind of lulled or less intensive period would last too much. Russia used this operational pause to consolidate its logistics and prepare for further advance. Second point, though there is widespread discussion and kind of wishful thinking in international media that Russia is running out of its forces that could be deployed to Ukraine, in fact, it's not true. Russia has approximately 168 to be exact, 168 permanently ready deployable battalion tactical groups, so-called BTGs. Out of this 168 BTGs, so far around 120 have been deployed to Ukraine, meaning they have a lot of reserves already yet from the standing forces. Plus, they can mobilize reservists, and in case of necessity, they can also use conscripts for supply and other tasks. Point number 3 about conscripts. Yesterday, it has been confirmed that the Russian army is also sending conscripts to Ukraine, which is illegal by Russian law. Nevertheless, it's happening. How do they cover the story? They force the conscripts to sign papers which kind of transfer their status into contract soldiers, so-called kontratniki. And sending contract soldiers abroad, it's something more, it's legal. However, the presence of conscripts is decreasing the combat readiness and the combat value of Russian forces, first. Second, politically, it's much more sensitive back home in Russia. Still, as Russia is going to pull more forces into the conflict, we will see more conscripts getting used. Of course, officially labeled as kontratniki, as contract soldiers, but de facto they will still be conscripts. Point number 4, since our last briefing, Russia has considerably changed its strategy. Right now, it's maximizing the suffering inflicted on the civilian population. The bombing of Mariupol, the shelling of Kharkiv, the upcoming shelling of Kiev, the really indiscriminate bombing of Chernihiv all fit into this strategy. So far, it doesn't seem that Russians would be too quick or too much in a hurry to go into urban combat. Instead, they seem to apply kind of a Grozny strategy or Grozny approach. So shell all the cities basically to pieces. I mean, the mayor of Mariupol said already a few days ago that 90% of the buildings in the city have been damaged. Not 19, but 90. So basically, Mariupol is getting reduced to a pile of rubble, resulting in extreme human suffering. Similar things are awaiting Kharkiv. Similar things are already happening in Chernihiv, and of course, Kiev is going to be the big story here. Point number. So my last point here: Western weapon supplies do work. So we see that Ukrainian forces are employing Western anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft weapons in a very skillful, very creative way. So here, if there is room for any kind of advising, the delivery of weapon supplies is something that, if that continues, that would help Ukraine a lot. One more thing about the deliveries: Ukraine has more than 90,000 volunteers who applied to serve in various volunteer fighting formations. They have a very high fighting spirit. Some of them have some military trainings, others don't, but they are critically short of equipment, meaning here non-lethal equipment. So in fact, it's not only weapons that Ukraine needs, it's also every kind of equipment which increases the survivability of Ukraine's volunteer territorial defense forces. Bulletproof vests, helmets, warm clothing, generators, night vision devices, gloves, tactical goggles, all these things. So in order to help the survivability or advance the survivability of these volunteer forces, Ukraine is in grave need of assistance, basically all kinds of assistance they can get. They are providing lists to their Western partners in order to make sure that they get the things they actually need. So that's it from me for now, and I'm waiting for questions. Thank you. Sharing stopped.
Thank you very much, András. One quick question about the mix. We had a sort of a discussion, internal discussion, how to supply, or whether to supply these sort of Soviet-made fighter jets. Very confusing story. Maybe just a clever distraction. But what is the state of play? Do you expect sort of these kind of aircraft to be delivered to Ukraine?
From the logistical perspective, this would definitely not something easy. Besides, with a bit of simplification, Russians are also reading the news. So right at the moment when this discussion started, Russia intensified its attacks against Ukraine's airports and airfields, including even airstrips. So even if the transfer of MiGs could be realized, there will probably be plenty of hardships in operating them. Instead, the approach seems to be that, so instead of transferring them actually fighter jets, which require complicated logistics, very high quality fuel, proper airfields, all these things, it seems to be that Ukraine is getting more and more air defense weapons, and these air defense weapons allow them to basically provide their own no-fly zone, at least over the big cities. Much less, of course, than a functioning Air Force would, but still in the short run, I think that this is going to be more of a solution than the transferring of a few fighter jets.
Thank you very much, András. Let's move on now to Stefan Meister. What is the situation from a Russian point of view?
Good morning, also from my side. I just want to add one more point to the military situation, also which links also to the internal Russian discussion. The Russian government is changing the law on conscripts at the moment. And that means they will earlier more people try to mobilize also from their own society, and I think this might link into rethinking also how they will control in future Ukraine. So they need more people. They're bringing in also Wagner. I think this is more spec operation about Kiev and the cities, but I think to mobilize also more of Russian conscripts and soldiers, I think means also that they rethink their whole strategy, and it's also the question how to control Ukraine with a society which is in a great majority anti-Russian and which will also fight. So I just wanted to add this because I think that's also a big question. So just several points. I think we understand more and more that Putin made the decision of the war in a small circle of people. And first of all, with Minister of Defense Shoigu and Head of General Staff Gerasimov, but did not coordinate with other actors in the Russian leadership. So it's a very military operation which we see here, and it was very much coordinated with the military people, and a lot of other people also who are decision makers seem to be not informed that this war will stop. We see now also there's a shockwave in the Russian elite. So there are more reports also about this, and they really shocked that they really started this large-scale war. They didn't expect it. So if you see also economic actors, people from ministries, they just didn't expect that this will happen. And I think especially the economic actors understand that Western sanctions and the lack of compromise from Putin's side will change fundamentally their way of life. So Russia is really changing fundamentally now. With this war, with these sanctions, but also with the action of Russian leadership. A majority in the Duma and the government thought until the last moment this is only about Donbass. And Putin prepared the war also as a special operation inside of Russia. So not only a special operation in Ukraine, but also inside of Russia, it was prepared like a special operation. There will be no return to the pre-war situation. I think we should be very clear here for Russia. Russia itself is changing fastly with laws against speaking out of opinions and media coverage on the war. This is an exodus for the rest of independent media, any opposition and takeover of Russia by security elites and thinking. And we see an exodus also of people. So people leaving from different sectors to all the countries they can easily leave. South Caucasus is a destination from IT experts, but also from other highly skilled peoples who use the opportunity to leave the country. What we see in Russian society is, despite some protest, which is brutally repressed by security forces, apathy, but at the same time also patriotism and rallies around the flag. Putin's rating has grown from more than 60% to more than 70%. I think this is a typical reaction when a war starts, that there is a kind of patriotism. And then later, I think the sanctions will work harder. This might drop down. The more people feel the cost of the war and sanctions, the more the state is prepared has to prepare repressions. The leadership controls most of the public space. There are no public discussions about the war, and they try to get the internet even more under control and to restrict any kind of independent communication. I expect for Russia a Belarus scenario. Closing Russia, the whole country is held in a warlike situation. The funding of security forces will go on, and they will then repress the whole country. So that's much more difficult than in the much smaller Belarus. But I think the focus is really on security, people funding security forces, preparing also stronger repressions, controlling the information sphere, and through propaganda also impact on the people. Putin wants to reverse the decision which were made after the end of the East-West conflict, when Russia was weak, and I think he will stick to this goal. He is very emotional and angry, and a reactive person. I think this is also something we had maybe to relearn, how emotional Putin is, and even if he's doing what he's saying. So he's less rational in a way than we thought, and I think it's about personal revenge also on the US and the West. So this kind of revenge is important for Putin, and I think that's also one of the reasons why they made wrong decisions and they had wrong assessments about Ukraine. The meeting with the Security Council in the beginning of the war was made to put up decisions on the war on several shoulders and to create a situation of collective guilt within the decision-making circles, even if Putin made this decision without consultations of these people. So I think he brought these people in. They are all now part of making these decisions, and it would be very difficult for them just to step out or to make a regime change, yeah, because they are part of this regime. And I think that's also was part of Putin's special operation at the beginning of the war. And I think, as András already has said, we are now in a Chechnya scenario war. So it's really attacking civil society, destroying civil infrastructure, burned earth. I think that's what we are seeing. I would say the attacks on the nuclear station are not about destroying them, but messaging to Europe that there is a threat of nuclear disaster. And I think this should put us under pressure also to put pressure the Ukrainian government to stop this war. Neutrality, and I just finished, I'm closely to finish, neutrality under Russian conditions, I think, which is at the moment very much discussed, and we have this meeting in Ankara today. I think for me, neutrality is an euphemism in this context. It means to accept Russia's sphere of influence, and will mean also a regime change and creating of a pro-Russian Ukrainian government. So I think there is no neutrality for Ukraine. Neutrality means Russian control and a pro-Russian government. I think this goal has not changed of regime change, despite other announcements by the government, and we should stop trust official announcements of the Russian government, also on negotiations. The government bodies are part of the Russian disinformation campaign, also the foreign ministry. They try to confuse and demoralize Western public, and also the Ukrainian side. So I think that's also very important. And Putin does not care about civil victims on both sides. He wants to control Ukraine at any cost, and a neutral Ukraine means for him a Russian Ukraine. So I stop here.
Thank you very much, Stefan. With a view of the time, let's move on now to Alia with her take on the situation of refugees and how the EU has reacted so far. There's talk of a sort of resilience fund, which will sort of include defense and energy security, but also maybe refugees at Versailles today. But maybe you can just draw us a quick picture of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, and you said it at the beginning, Henning. In just 2 weeks, we've already reached 2 million people who had left, who have fled Ukraine, and we could expect something between 4 to 7 million people to flee Ukraine in total. We also have 1 million people who are displaced within Ukraine, and they add to the already existing 800,000 people who were displaced previously following the annexation of Crimea in 2014. For those who've been able to leave Ukraine, they've done so through neighboring countries, Moldova, and EU countries, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania. Most of them are at the moment women, children, and elderly people. And we also have about 100,000 people who are non-Ukrainian nationals. These are foreign workers, students, but also refugees who were residing in Ukraine before the war. And all of these people are moving very quickly across the EU. So we know when they're entering EU territory, but without internal border controls, we don't really know where people are exactly at the moment. So for instance, Poland has registered over 1 million arrivals, but half of these people could have already left for countries like Germany, France, Italy, or Spain, where you have important Ukrainian diaspora communities. So what has the EU done so far? It's done something quite historical in terms of its policy response. It's activated what is called a Temporary Protection Directive. This is historical because it is a tool that has never been used in EU history. It was designed originally in 2001 in the aftermath of the Yugoslavian wars. Maybe 3 quick points on that to explain. The first thing is that people do not need to apply for it like they would apply for asylum. They simply are granted protection immediately as soon as they register with national authorities. The second thing is that people under protection benefit immediately from a number of rights and services. They have access to education, healthcare, housing, welfare benefits, but also very importantly, they have access to the job market and they're able to work, which is not the case of asylum seekers. So essentially, these people are not refugees or asylum seekers, but more so protection seekers or people under protection. And the last point is that this temporary protection is not only limited to Ukrainian nationals, but also includes people who are unable to return to their country of origin. So these would be stateless people, refugees, asylum seekers, but also long-term residents of Ukraine. Now, the EU is also pushing member states to extend this protection to short-term residents, so foreign students, foreign workers who are residing in Ukraine. Why the temporary protection? Now, it sounds like a pretty convenient tool at the moment for the crisis that the EU is facing. It is convenient both for governments because it avoids burdening immigration offices with millions, literally millions of asylum applications that could have taken up years to be settled. And it's also convenient for protection seekers because it removes a lot of the red tape they would have to go through normally. But there are still a few challenges, and I'll just speak of one briefly, which would be the capacity to cope with the current arrival numbers. There is a sort of what I would call a vicious circle of refugee policy in the EU, which means that it starts with the lack of political will to reform refugee regimes, which then creates administrations that are slow moving with a lot of red tape. Now, these administrations are very quickly overburdened and create the illusion of an overwhelming crisis, and then further reduces the political and the public appetite for reform, and the circle repeats itself. So right now, national administrations, local authorities, and the civil society all lack the capacity, the resources, the experience to deal with the current arrivals. And this is especially true of countries neighboring Ukraine. We know this is the case at the moment in Poland and Hungary. And this in spite of the overwhelmingly positive response that we see coming from the public and politicians alike. When we say that some member states have done a U-turn on the refugee policy, essentially it means that they're entering unknown territory. We could also speak of, the challenge of harmonization and how national governments are going to implement this EU directive and what kind of legal patchwork it might create. But I'll stop here just to say that so far we've seen overwhelmingly positive response at the policy level as well as at the civil society level, but there's still a lot of practical questions, but also questions of how will this impact EU refugee policy in the long run.
Thank you very much indeed. I think you mentioned Moldova, which probably is one of the sort of key concerns at the moment. But let's move on now to Didi for her quick take on the China factor in the whole war. Josep Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs of the European Union, has mentioned or hinted quite heavily that he expects and hopes and wants China to get involved, but sort of the overwhelming expert sort of take seems to be that this is sort of ill-judged. What is your take?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Henning. 3 weeks into this appalling war, and China still has not condemned Russia's invasion. I think that when one considers the level of suffering and destruction underway, this is really quite an extraordinary position to have taken, while at the same time China claims to be neutral. And also daily, in fact, is attacking the United States above all. I checked, and just last night, Xinhua News Agency, the state news agency, came out with a real screed against the US. And I'll quote very briefly. They said that the situation with Ukraine, they described the US as the instigator of the crisis, and said, quote, "The true nature of the empire of lies has been exposed once again, showing the American hegemon's habit of lying." Now, this is the nature of the rhetoric that we're hearing from Beijing. And I have to say, it does rather challenge one's capacity of imagination to think how, in this situation, China could be a neutral or in any way, shape, or form trustworthy mediator in this really appalling situation. So, and I think the fact that not just Josep Borrell, but we've also heard the same from Macron and Scholz, that they're even entertaining this idea, shows I'm sorry to say, but I think it shows a real lack of experience, actually, and also a limited capacity for strategic thinking, for long-term thinking, which is what we're dealing with here now with China, and also a remarkable naivety. And this comes, of course, because Germany, China, the EU are, I think, still in an old paradigm when it comes to viewing relations with China. China has made very clear that Russia is, as Wang Yi, the foreign minister, said on Monday, its leading strategic partner. Limitless ties were touted on February the 4th. There's a broad agreement in the granular China watching community, if you like, that Xi Jinping knew from February the 4th that something was going to happen, that Putin was going to do something in Ukraine. The details he may not have known, but certainly he knew, we believe. And it's really remarkable also to, we need to a little bit step back as well from this appalling, very, very urgent situation and look at how this is shifting world relations. And I know I've got very little time left. Russia is becoming increasingly dependent on China. It is already quite dependent on China. They do 147 billion euros in two-way trade in 2021. By 2024, the Chinese have announced it's going to go up to 250 billion, which is more than Germany and China's trade, by the way. In the first 2 months of this year, trade rose, according to the Chinese government, by 38.5%. Now, there's a real sense here of something building, that they have each other's backs, despite concerns, obviously, in some parts of society. But these are not countries where these concerns and opposition to the policy of two men, Putin and Xi, are easily expressed or ever taken into account, really. So, I think, again, I understand the temptation to try and find a broker to solve this appalling situation, but I would just counsel extreme caution in thinking that China is that broker. I'll stop there and leave room for questions. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Didi. Maybe one quick one, but even though we don't have much time, wouldn't it be in the Chinese interest, though, to keep sort of relations with Europe in a sort of serviceable condition. That sort of is Beijing seeing the danger of sort of
absolutely
even more estranged.
Absolutely, you're exactly right, Henning. Beijing has long hoped and continues to hope to this day that Europe will be a kind of a semi-friend, if you like, as it attacks the United States of America more and more violently in its rhetoric. And this is exactly why we should not fall into this trap, as I fear we may be seeing some leaders in Europe doing, of believing that somehow, Beijing is our friend in this situation.
Thank you very much. I would like now to start and sort of put some questions from our audience to our panel. There are two for Stefan Meister in the first instance. This sort of refers to something you mentioned, that sort of Putin with this sort of televised meeting of his Security Council somehow in sort of made this whole leadership team sort of part of the war, even though they probably had no say in it. Doesn't that nonetheless create some sort of divisions between the people who sort of Putin, Gerasimov, and Shoigu, sort of who took the decisions, who were sort of in the lead, and those who sort of have to sell it, like Medvedev, for instance? Is there then a split nonetheless? And sort of where do the security services come in this? Sort of they must have sort of misinformed Putin about the situation in Ukraine, as I think they have now realized, as you said, sort of there's no open arms, no sort of liberators welcome for the Russian forces. Are they in a particular situation as a consequence? And one question sort of just quickly added from me, sort of there's sort of if we look at the demands on the Russian side, there was sort of the sort of denazification, demilitarization aspect was sort of de-emphasized, or so it seemed, which sort of gave hope to some Western observers that maybe sort of Putin was sort of moderating his demands. Is that a false perception?
I'm not so sure about the division. So I think even if people maybe are not happy with this war, they are part of this cohort. They are part of this Putin system and regime, and they are anyway, they are anyway part of the corruption which is going on, of the decisions were made also in the past. And I just don't think that they will split off from Putin in this situation. I think they also understand their war crime is going on. This is really will become a very bloody war, and it is already a very bloody war. So I think, and I don't see any attempts to stop this. And I don't think that these people around Putin and in the Security Council, which Putin knows since St. Petersburg, so since the 19th, part of them at least, which have a strong track record, strong relation with him. I think that they will just that they will change their opinion. They maybe even agree in a part also with it. I think what we might see is what we already see, or what we saw in the past, and maybe see, is kind of a competition between different security institutions, and the military seems to be here the key in this campaign, and they have somehow failed to supply, in this situation. So I think that might show some rift. But I think, coming to the second question, I think this war was very much made on Putin's assessment of Ukraine. I think that's my impression. I think he did not listen maybe to the advisors, and maybe they advised him also in a way that he got what he wanted to listen. So I think this is I don't know if this is the case, but I have the impression he only wants to hear what he thinks. And I think, and he wrote this article, he has his speeches: Ukraine is no state, Ukraine is no nation, they will not be able to survive. And I think he strongly believed this, and I think that's the main problem, that he does not listen to experts, that he does not care about societies also as actors. He always thinks the Americans are behind this, it's manipulation. And I think that drives his wrong assessment. It was the last time the case, and it's again the case, and he's not learning. I think that's the problem. And others have them to fix the problems. In a way, they do it now militarily. Henning, I didn't understand your question entirely. What? So this was
about sort of, is Putin moderating his demands? because in some of the reporting on the sort of conditions under which the Russians and the Ukrainians may kind of come to a ceasefire, that the demand for demilitarization and denazification, so-called, that don't exist, but that was dropped in some communications. Do you, or is Putin still pushing for his sort of extreme aims?
I don't think that he has given this up. So I think that that's a tactical move, in my opinion. Also, that they know, say, we never wanted to have regime change. Definitely, they wanted to have regime change. They still want to have regime change, and I think this goal is not changing. It's tactical also with regard to sanctions and to our reactions. It should open a kind of negotiations, but it's a fake negotiations. I think at the same time the war is going on. And they create realities which puts Ukraine under pressure and which should make them able to make more willing to make more compromises. But I don't think that this paradigm is changing also in the internal Russian debate, and it's more made for us and for hoping for some moves. Yeah. So, but don't trust this government and these officials in any way. I think I would be here very careful.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Let's bring in our colleague Milan Nič, who's raised his hand. Milan, please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I will try to ask questions in this way, raising electronic hand, also encouraging others. I think it's more fun. So my first question is to András about military situation around Odessa. So there has been expectation that the naval forces that are there would move on Odessa, and also the land forces turn west. How do you see that dynamics on the ground? Second question to Stefan. As EU leaders are meeting later today in Versailles, one of the points on the agenda will be Ukraine's application for membership. If there is any process on this, would that have any impact on the ground? And third question to Alia about the Ukraine refugees. These are frontline countries now, and there are those that were in 2015 against relocations. What could EU do now to help them as they are undergoing this really profound sort of enthusiasm and wir schaffen das moment, when cities like Budapest are turning into Munich at the time, my own town, Bratislava, and so on. So what can EU do to help them immediately? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milan. Sorry, András first, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Milan. Seems to be that the advance on Odessa has slowed down. Russian forces are right now consolidating their control over Kherson and first want to finish the Mykolaiv. And from Mykolaiv, they are launching an offensive northwards, supposedly in order to cut the country's main east-west road, so the road leading from Dnipro to the western part of the country. I think advance on Odessa will restart or get intensified only once they manage to control Mykolaiv and secure their grip on the city. Without that, also from the logistical perspective, an advance on Odessa is not possible, but it doesn't mean that they have given it up. Probably the priority has changed, but they are shelling Odessa, they are launching missiles at Odessa, they are sending this code of DRGs, like diversion reconnaissance groups, kind of saboteur groups to Odessa to create havoc and chaos. So Odessa is still in the crosshairs.
Well, there's a strong moral pressure on the EU to give Ukraine membership perspective. To be honest, I think it's a non-starter. I think it's a wrong focus to invest time in this. Ukraine really does not need at the moment a membership perspective. It needs intelligence supply, it needs weapons supply, it needs humanitarian corridors, it needs other things. And I don't think it will get this. It distracts the EU also and the discussions in the EU on something which will not help on the ground, and which would undermine also the whole process for the whole process for membership. Yes, and I think we already heard from Kosovo, from the Western Balkans, what does it mean for us? Also Georgia and Moldova reacted to this. So I think the EU cannot give up its process, and it is not ready for more members. And again, I don't think it will, Ukraine will benefit at the moment from this, and it really needs other kinds of support.
Thank you. And now to Alia, maybe there was one question in the chat, also sort of what is being done to safeguard or to make sure that the women in particular fleeing Ukraine aren't sort of being sold. Well, I think the question sort of refers to being endangered by sort of being treated as slaves. But I think this is the sort of the wider problem of them being sort of taken advantage of given their peculiar and threatened situation.
Yeah, well, the good thing so far is that since people have access to an open border, since frontline countries, as Milan said, or have kept their border crossing points open, people are able to cross freely, easily, so they do not need to seek the services of a smuggler, where they could then potentially fall into situations of trafficking. That being said, there was some concern, I know, here in Berlin, where you had a lot of people showing up at train stations and bus stations saying, I'm happy to host individuals who've just arrived. And here there was a bit of concern of who are these people exactly. So now civil society organizations are trying to monitor a bit better who is offering shelter, who is offering accommodation to these people. And police forces are, of course, working on this. Perhaps moving to Milan's question about how to support Eastern member states. The EU is mobilizing funds, of course. I know that they want to tap into unspent cohesion funds to support Eastern member states in their reception capacity. But there is also, as part of this temporary protection system, there is also a transfer mechanism that's in place, or at least that will be put into place. And the idea is that once a member state says, we're reaching our hosting capacity, our reception capacity, raise your hand and we're going to provide help. There will be some kind of a transfer system where people will be transferred to another member state. Now, this is, as Milan said, this is exactly the kind of solidarity that countries like Hungary, like Poland, refused to offer to fellow member states, Greece or Italy, some years ago. So it remains to be seen how this question might sharpen some of the differences between member states. For now, it seems that the Ukraine question is treated as a very exceptional sort of a standalone issue, as opposed to the regular business refugee policy business in Europe. So and we see an overwhelmingly positive response and solidarity across the Union at the moment. What can happen is that in the future, well, as often in conflict situations, the people who are able to flee the first are those who have the most resources, the most means, and the most connections. And we see that because people are moving very fast across Europe, they have family in other places, they are able to reach family members and relatives across Europe. For people who might be coming in the coming weeks or months, that might not be the case. And so they might be staying in frontline countries, they might be staying in Hungary, and Poland, Slovakia, and there will be help needed.
Thank you very much. I would like to put two China questions to Didi before we go to Klaus Wittmann for the next question. This is sort of a comment, more like a question. Sort of the point is that being made by Alexander Wolsteiner, that sort of wouldn't it sort of be counterintuitive to ask China to condemn what's happening in Russia and then expect it to act as an honest broker? So do we have priorities right if we in the West want China to mediate, and is there a question of Chinese nationals being sort of threatened by what's going on in Ukraine? Do you have any information whether the Chinese nationals are in the war zone or in Ukraine?
So there are about 6,000 Chinese citizens, PRC citizens I'm talking about here, so People's Republic of China, in Ukraine that we know of, or that's the state of affairs when war broke out. And they were rather unpopular at one point, because there was a particular video clip that went around of two young Chinese men making fun of Ukraine and saying it was, very corrupt and didn't have anything to offer and what a dump, and this kind of language, which very much mirrors a lot of the language that we're seeing within China in the social media, which is in some way, can be very, very aggressively pro-Putin. And this is, of course, a choice on the part of the Chinese authorities because they have enormous control over the information space in China. For example, a statement by 5 university professors that condemning this war and saying this has to stop, you need to talk, stop fighting, and condemning Putin and Russia was instantly censored in the Chinese media. So, you see what you see in the media, domestically there is an expression of what the government wants people to see and think. So that's the reason why there has been some pressure on Chinese citizens in Ukraine, and they are now trying very hard to, the Chinese government by its embassy is trying very hard to get them out. On the other issue, Western leaders not necessarily hoping for a breakthrough by calling on China to mediate. Well, I mean, they may want to increase the pressure on Beijing to take a stance regarding the war against Ukraine, but I would say that Beijing has already taken a stance on the war regarding Ukraine. And its stance is can at best be described as pro-Russian neutrality. So, I think we need to pass what that actually means. And I think, again, we need to a little bit draw back the lens and look at how this is actually telling us that we have, in essence, a new world order emerging here. And Europe is going to have to decide where it stands on this within this new world order. I think that, Xi Jinping making noises about how what a pity that there is a war in Europe again. I mean, I find this very disingenuous when he could, revert to some kind of humanistic reality, as the 5 university professors did very bravely, and simply say this fighting is appalling, it's got to stop, we need to talk, because he does have some influence.
Many thanks, Didi. Let's now go to Klaus Wittmann, who has raised his hand. Your question, please.
Good morning. I would like to ask the experts, how do you interpret the signals sent out by President Zelensky, readiness to put aside NATO membership, to negotiate Crimea, Donbas republics, neutrality? All this has led to speculations by people who do not seem to be aware that in 2014, Ukraine had a neutral status by law, and we all know in what that resulted. And Stefan Meister, I would like to ask whether he could perhaps be a little bit more specific on how dangerous you find the Chechen fighters and the Wagner militias. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's also get the question in from Boris Ginsburg, who's the next up.
Hello, my name is Boris Ginsburg. I'm a doctoral researcher at the Free University of Berlin. I've got 2 questions. One question to Stefan Meister. In 2020 and 2021, we have seen a wave of repressions against oppositional actors in Russia. And many people said that this is like a preparation for the Duma elections last September. But looking now at the Ukraine crisis, can we also assume that these repressions were also preparation for the invasion in Ukraine in order to get rid of oppositional actors who could possibly organize protests against this war? And the second question is, there are a lot of talks about a possible EU oil embargo against Russia. And let's suppose it will happen. Some people say that Iran could be an alternative supplier of oil, but in how far could Iran as an alternative supplier be a problem for the cooperation with Israel when Israel tries to mediate within this conflict? So these are my 2 questions. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Excellent questions, which once again sort of bring up the complexity of the situation. Maybe Stefan first, and if anyone else from the panel wants to jump in, please feel free.
On Zelensky's announcement with regard to NATO membership and Crimea, I think for me, it's more signaling that the Ukrainian side is willing to make some concessions, that they are really under pressure now, and that there are some areas where there would be, so this is an opening for negotiations and to show that they are willing to negotiate. But I think on fundamental things, Zelensky is not moving. Yeah, so and he can also not move on fundamental questions. And I don't see also Russia really moving on this. So I think it's testing out if there's any room for negotiations at the moment and which topics might work on the other side in a way. Yeah, you can say. But I think as I said, I'm rather skeptical about. And the way the war is going on, I think, makes it even more difficult also to make any kind of compromise. Yeah. On the Chechen fighters and the Wagner, I don't know how dangerous this is. I think it's about the cities. So it's about taking the cities. I think maybe András can also say more about this. Because they are, and also Syrian fighters. It looks like they bring also Syrians in. This is at least rumors. Which have the ability, the capability to take cities and have these house-to-house fights. I think which the normal Russian army is not able to. And it will cost also more victims. So this is also about private actors. And maybe not Russian citizens with mothers who then may also complain that their children has been killed. So I think it's on one hand that they are able to do it and easier able, but on the other hand, it's a different kind of victims you might then have. And they are really hard fighters. So I think that's really a challenge. But we also saw already that the Ukrainians were fighting back also Chechen fighters. Yeah, and I think it's let's see how this goes. But maybe also András can add here. On the question with the Duma election. So I always said these repressions around the Duma election is not about the Duma election. It's Duma election is just a step in between. To destroy a whole Russian opposition, destroy Russian independent media, and any kind of criticism on Putin and his regime. And I think this is a policy which was starting earlier and was going on also after the election. It might be the case that this was also preparation for the war, that there will be no opposition, no independent voice, no critical voice. I think that might be the case. I don't know if this is the case, but I think this is a full repressive regime, which has really changed its character systematically. And in this sense, this war is logic, and the repression of the opposition is also logic. And just to destroy any kind of this opposition. So on oil supply, I think Venezuela is discussed, and Iran. This can really change also the situation with Iran and with Venezuela. I think we already see that the US is also talking with Venezuela. This will create new problems, I think, with Israel. I can imagine at the moment it's very constructive also Israeli side in these negotiations, but I can imagine if it's about Iran, that is a red line, yeah, for Israeli government. So I think that's not well thought through. It's rather a reaction to the situation, and now we are looking for any oil and gas we can get because we have no alternatives. I think that will make us more willing to compromise on things we were before not willing to compromise.
András, please.
Thank you. On the Chechen forces, the Wagners and the Syria kind of people to be deployed. There is a bit of difference between these. The Syrians are probably going to be used the same way like they have been used also by Azerbaijan in the Karabakh conflict. So not as a high value force, but some kind of a first echelon which goes in, make Ukrainians uncover their firing positions, so that after the second and third echelon can deal with the Ukrainian fighters easier. Syrians, I mean, the Russian expression is pushechная мясо, so kind of cannon fodder. Cheap, not much need to be accountable, and no domestic political repercussions. Wagner is a bit different. I mean, people of the Wagner group, which is not a single group and has been renamed, but doesn't matter, They have very high combat value, very high combat experience. So they might be kind of a spearheading force, particularly in urban combat. And unlike the Syrians, Wagner people speak Russian because decisive majority of them are Russians. So it's easier for them to operate in the cities than the Syrians. So it's a really high value fighting force with a lot of internal problems, discipline problems, different levels of training, but still. So the deployment of Wagner, once that happens publicly, is also to scare and terrorize the population. Some of the so-called DRGs, this kind of diversion and reconnaissance groups, are actually not Russian regular Spetsnaz, but Wagner people. So some of them are already deployed to Ukraine to create chaos and havoc. Chechens is a third category. They are also there because President Kadyrov personally wanted to get involved in the success. So it has also been Kadyrov pushing his man, that his man should be present there. Chechens are very good in internal policing and counter-terrorism. However, particularly these young Chechens we see in the pictures, most of them already do not have urban combat experience because many of them were just not even born in times of the Chechen war. So far, they've seen limited deployment in the fighting in Ukraine, limited deployment with catastrophic losses. However, when it comes to internal policing and again, pacification of the occupied territories, let's put it like this, they can be a high value force. And their PR value is also extremely high. I mean, people are afraid of the Chechens. So the continuous discussion about the Chechens also has an information warfare component here. Out of the three groups, I'd be most afraid of the Wagners.
Thank you very much, András. We're running out of time, but let's hear from Stephen Pope as well, who's raised his hand.
Good morning, and thank you very much for such a valuable briefing. I think all of us on this call are really grateful that we have the opportunity to join this. I have one question. It centers around the Balkans. Stefan Meister mentioned earlier on about Putin's lust for revenge against the West. We saw the recent protests in Belgrade in support of Russia, and of course we've seen the worrying tensions building over months in Republika Srpska. What is the potential for the Russians, for Putin's to push or sort of raise the tensions in the Balkans to distract us even more and create another crisis within Europe?
Thank you very much, Stefan.
So I think what the Russians are trying on one hand is also discreditation of the EU, distracting also with other conflicts, the attention, increasing its bargaining position, and creating a different area of possible conflict, which will absorb also our attention and our ability to act and improving maybe here really Russia's bargaining position. But I think it also showing the failure of EU policy in the Western Balkans, and that the EU is not able to manage, or the West, you can also say, with including the US, is not able to manage the situation there, and there are in Europe also pro-Russian actors and forces in this warlike situation. They can in a way mobilize. So I think that would be my take on this.
Thank you very much. We have just time for one last question by Peter Linke, please.
Yes, can you hear me? Oh no, Stummschaltung. Can you hear me? Okay, there's one question for Dr. Rácz. There have been Russian press briefings on secretive Ukrainian offensive plans concerning Donbass. And there have also been press briefings just yesterday and the days before on American biolabs in the Ukraine. Would you say all this stuff is fabricated, or so is it part of a propaganda campaign, or is there something to it?
Fun fact, the press briefings were given by Major General Igor Konashenkov, the International Press Secretary of the Russian Ministry of Defense. This is the same Igor Konashenkov who in 2014 and 15 gave several press briefings about how the poor Malaysian airliner was shut down by the Ukrainians. So personally, I wouldn't give much credibility to what Major General Konashenkov is telling. This is part of a propaganda campaign. This is part of the information warfare. They are doing this in order to force us to react and to shape our discussion. So personally, I wouldn't give, again, much credibility to it. Mr. Konashenkov, Major General Konashenkov, is basically the same kind of, he has the same kind of role like Maria Zaharova for the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much. We are out of time, I'm afraid, but let's sort of close with a quick fire round through the panel in reverse order, starting with Didi. So what would be the one thing you think the West, Germany, Europe should do to help Ukraine to improve the situation there? What would be your number one recommendation?
Look, I'm no Ukraine expert, so I think I'll stick to my patch and look at what I think we need to learn from this situation, which is that we need to rethink our international strategic political order. I think that's the big takeaway from what we see evolving here. And I think we need to deal with China differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didi. Alia, what would be your number one recommendation?
Yeah, well, I think recommendation is a big word, but I think the EU has done a lot already on the migration side, and it's proven that it's ready to host millions of people for up to 3 years. This is what this temporary protection I mentioned will cover, up to 3 years. So the EU is ready, I think, to host civilians, Ukrainian civilians, and as I said in the comments, we might need to welcome a Russian refugee asylum seekers in the next month or years or so. On this side, I think the EU has done its share, has shown that it can show up.
Thank you very much, Stefan.
I let the military side to András, because I think that is what Ukraine needs most at the moment. So I think to keep the sanctions on Russia, to strengthen the sanctions, to make really clear this is a game changer in every field, also in the energy field, and to make to Russian elites and society very clear that if they don't stop this war, I think this is a major shift in any sense. Yeah, so I think that to keep the line and not trust also Russian propaganda and disinformation, I think that's also a major challenge for us.
Thank you very much. And last words to András.
Thank you. My two recommendations here. First, as much weapons, ammunition, and fuel as possible. Ammunition and fuel is also important. Second, we shall not get tired. Right now, there is an upheaval of pro-Ukraine feelings, of pro-Ukrainian sentiments. We shall not let this high level of sympathy drop. This is not going to be a short conflict. So we need to be persistent, we need to be resilient, and we need to keep up supporting Ukraine as long as it's necessary. Over. Thank you very much, András. And with this sort of plea, I think we at the DGAP will try our level best to follow events the same way we have in the last couple of weeks, and hope to see many of you again here in a week's time. Unfortunately, by then the conflict won't be over. It won't be over for a very long time. And with that thought, I thank you all for attending this morning. Please join me in thanking our excellent panel. And have a very good morning.